Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm here with my co-host, Matt Scott, and our special guest, Jim West, Camel Trophy veteran and recovery expert, also a member of the 7P International Overland Training Team. And this starts part 2 of our Principles of Overlanding Vehicle Recovery, where we're going to go into a little deeper dive on the kinds of equipment you want to bring along and the lessons that we've learned traveling around the world. We're also going to pick up from a few of the stories that we ended the last episode with, and then get into the meat of overland recovery. And a special thanks to Danner Boots, who is supporting this episode today. Danner's new Logger 917 was inspired by the classic pattern and lines of Danner's original caulked logging boots made in the Pacific Northwest. They're built with Danner's trusted quality and durability. The Logger 917 is designed to ensure you're comfortable and dry wherever your adventure takes you, even if it includes a little bit of recovery along the way. With a Gore-Tex waterproof liner and a Vibram SPE rubberized EVA midsole, the Logger 917 offers performance, waterproofing, and lightweight comfort, all in a rugged yet refined style. Thanks, Danner. All right. So if the first goal is to not get stuck, let's say we do get stuck, we want to have some equipment along with us to help us get unstuck. These stories show that drapery doesn't really work. Frogs don't really work. And in Matt's case,
listen to your wife.
I guess you driving doesn't really work. I don't know.
Honestly, like every rad picture I have of a truck, somewhere cool, somewhere very remote. Yeah, she's the one driving.
That's awesome. So we want to have the right equipment along. And because we are trying to be responsible in our podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about safety equipment. So these are recommended items. There's a counterpoint to it as well, but it is a good idea to start with gloves. I do wear gloves, but this is something that I've got an opinion on, but I would love to know your thoughts, Jim.
Loose gloves, tight gloves?
Loose gloves versus tight gloves. Some people love the idea of these really loose gloves that in the one,
like a breeze, like someone coughs 5 feet away and the glove falls off.
Yeah. Well, yes. It's in case it gets caught by, I've never seen this happen
but it's only going to get caught.
I have snagged a glove on a wire rope. Yeah.
Do you wear loose gloves or do you wear tight gloves?
I wear, I call them mule skinners. They're just they're gloves, but they're reinforced a bit.
Yeah.
They're not winching gloves. So they're kind of in the middle.
Gotcha.
I think like a mechanic's glove, a rope glove or something like that actually Velcros on. I can see the problem. But again, if it becomes a problem, your winch operation practices are bad. You're too close to the winch.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing for those folks who have never got into the loose glove, tight glove debate is as you're putting the winch line on the spool, if you, with wire rope, it was a biggie. Although here in Arizona with cholla cactus, if you don't know what cholla cactus is,
they hurt.
Avoid them.
Look it up. So they can, with synthetic rope, you can get a cactus in there, and
Sure.
I've seen that, and you can get snagged almost the same as wire rope, but you end up with a little burr. It snags your glove. You're operating too close to the winch, and it sucks your hand in through the fair lead.
Sure.
And there's winch run-in and all that, and we can talk about that whenever you like. But winches don't stop immediately. They continue to roll a little bit until they kind of roll to a stop. And they're under full power. They have all that gearing while they're still moving. Sure. So if you get hung up on the wire rope and you're 2 inches away and you let go of the button, your hand is going to get pulled through that fair lead. Again, my 9,000 pound winch won't bat an eye at pulling this hand through, and it will be nasty. So loose gloves, you could get out of it when it snags. The problem with loose gloves, and the problem that I always had with them, because it seemed like Warren and all, well, I'm not picking on Warren, but Super Winch, everybody gave you a pair of gloves when you got a winch.
Sure.
And they were these massive loose gloves. You have zero dexterity.
That's the challenge. So you're constantly fighting with the shackles, and you're fighting with the connection points, and you're taking
them off.
Yeah. And you end up needing to take them off. So I think it is an interest, and we're not saying that one way is right or wrong. I think when it comes to the loose gloves versus tighter gloves, use the thing that allows you to be most proficient and successful in the recovery, and then use good recovery practice so that way you don't get your hands into scenarios that involve pinching.
Yeah, don't stick your hand in the winch.
No, it's a bad idea.
It's a really bad idea.
All right, so that's the glove thing. I also like to recommend that people have on glasses, whether it be safety glasses with clear lenses at night, just a pair of sunnies during the day, sunglasses during the day. And that's because I have encountered when under load, some of these components can kick out rocks or they can kick out metal shards.
Yeah, like a snatch strap can throw dust and little mini particles like everywhere when it tensions.
I think it's a good idea to have glasses on as well. I also think that it's a good idea to have on sturdy boots, and because you can drop a pulley block on your foot, which
you only do that once.
Yeah, people have done that actually with significant injury. So it's a good idea to have boots on. It's a good idea to not have loose clothing. I certainly don't have a problem with long hair, but if you've got longer hair, you want to have it tied back so that way your hair doesn't fall into the winch while you're working on the rope.
Speaking from experience.
I have zero experience with that. But again, the counterpoint to all of this safety stuff is be really careful around the whole virtue shaming concept of, like, you see an image and someone's in flip-flops and they don't have a glove. They're out there doing it. I see that most of the people that complain about this kind of stuff are typically people that are not doing it. So,
like, listen, the amount of times you get stuck compared to the amount of times you hop into your four-wheel drive, especially when you're a traveler. I don't need to dress like SEAL Team 6 to go drive around in my air-conditioned car to go down a road that I'm perfectly capable of doing. Occasionally you get stuck, and I think that the key thing there is that you don't put your hand in the winch. Just don't be a moron, right? Use common sense.
If it were that simple.
But if you're setting out to go recreational four-wheel driving, maybe don't wear board shorts and flip-flops. But when I'm driving down the beach for 200 kilometers in Cape York, I'm not wearing shoes, but that's just me. There's your counterpoint. Like, be smart. If you're in a situation where you clearly recognize, like, hey, we should not be wearing these clothes, well, then reevaluate.
Make that part of your assessment. Should I change my clothing? Should I add gloves? Should I put on glasses? Should I be mindful of the fact that I have long hair because I've been traveling for a long time and it's gotten long? Whatever. I wonder
if Dan Greck has ever got his hair stuck in his winch, because he's got that long hippie.
He's got some locks.
He's got that hippie hair.
He's got some locks. Yeah. So those are some general ideas around safety equipment, but also be really careful around the whole virtue shaming thing of it just makes you look silly. But then after that, what's the fundamental equipment? And what would you say if someone was just getting started with travel and four-wheel driving, what would be the few pieces of equipment that you would recommend around recovery that everybody brings in their vehicle, Jim? And now, let's assume that they don't have a winch.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just back that up. Until I did so when I did Camel Trophy, Super Winch gave us a free winch. It's the first winch I ever owned.
Yeah.
Little known fact, on my resume to get on the Camel Trophy team, I lied and said I'd used winches left and right. What I meant was come-alongs, because they were inexpensive. So, we talked about it, and just looking at the list, it's a good list, is a shovel.
Yeah.
I am not bashing anybody who comes up with a overlanding shovel, but I'm cheap. I'm cheap. The shovel in my vehicle now is actually an old British military T-handle shovel. It kind of approximates the Camel Trophy shovel, which was a bulldog.
Carter shovel.
Yeah. And it works good. It's short. It works you to death. But I don't get the $400 and $500 shovel thing. Again, I'm sure they're brilliant shovels. Have a shovel. It doesn't matter if you go down to Home Depot and buy a $12 shovel. Have a great shovel, a $500 shovel. I like to carry stuff that I can do multiple things with it. It's not a single-use piece of equipment.
So you can go poop with your shovel just as easily as you get unstuck with your shovel. I like a...
Yeah, that's like 90% of what I use my shovel for.
Totally. Or you're snuffing out a fire or whatever. You use it for general utility things, or you're digging a hole so you can level your vehicle or whatever.
Yeah, I think that my shovel came from the Korean War.
I bet it works.
So it
works.
I like a T-handled shovel. I like a D-handled shovel. I like a shorter shovel.
Force.
So you can get a little bit of force. You can also get underneath the vehicle fairly easy. I like for it to be a spade. If you're in the snow, of course you want something that is flat nose so you can displace more material. Sand, it can go either way. Don't get too hung up on it, but I think that you should always have a shovel with you, and it's a really good idea to make it a spade that's a little shorter so you can get up underneath the vehicle easily.
I really like those Glock entrenching tools as well.
That's a good one.
You turned me onto those a while ago, and I want to say they're $30.
They're not that expensive.
They have a saw in one end. They do fold down so you can use it as I want to say a trowel is the technical term, to clear stuff from underneath the vehicle at a 90-degree angle. They work well. I've used the expensive shovels like the Demos shovels.
Right. Yeah.
They're
they
cool.
probably work well too.
Yeah, they're cool, but like I recognize the irony. There's cheap versions of the product that I sell. For me on a shovel, I don't see the value perhaps in spending a huge amount of money on a shovel.
Right.
But you do want to have good quality equipment and you want to have it with you. So
it's just
spend what you want.
Use case. If you need something that folds up, if you need something that's light, if you need something that looks super cool to your buddies, then maybe you want a different shovel.
Need versus want, right?
Yeah. But at the end of the day, we do want to have a spade that's a little shorter in length, and it's really good idea if it's T-handled or D-handled. So that's a really good idea. What else do we want to bring along, Jim?
Most of my decisions of how I load my car is how far afield I'm going and who I'm going with. If I'm going by myself and I'm going very remote, then I typically take a little bit more gear. I have to be able to self-rescue. In my box, I'm a minimalist. So I've got a kinetic strap. I've got a static strap that's my tree strap. I've got a few winch extensions. I've got a few soft shackles. I've got a few bow shackles, pulley block. Eliminate most of those things if you don't have a winch.
Sure.
So you see pretty much people love high lift jacks. I have a high lift jack. 95% of the time it sits in my shed. It never goes on my car. I've had it for probably 50 years.
Sure.
It's really hard to argue against the utility and the use case of a high lift jack. I'm in the same thing. Like
I've used it to
they're
winch a
80
car.
pounds to,
It's
you'd
miserable.
rather have one than not have one.
Correct.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the use of the high lift also or recovery. It's a little bit more of a challenge to use, but it can be suitable. So we want to have a recovery strap, or we want to have a kinetic energy recovery rope that is rated to 1.5 to 2 times gross vehicle weight, or if you're over gross vehicle weight, 1.5 to 2 times what that weight is. You want to be closer to 2 times if you're going to be traveling with mixed vehicles. If you're going to be traveling with like vehicles, you can be closer to that 1.5 times gross vehicle weight. And then you want to have a couple 2-3 screw pin C or D shackles along with you as well. All right. So now that we've got a recovery strap or a cur, we want to have 2 or 3 screw pin C or D shackles. C is the most common. They're typically going to be rated around 4.5 tons. You get a Van B shackle, it'll be rated around 6 metric tons.
Soft shackles are also a thing too. I really like those. Again, I think that the more metal that you can remove from a recovery scenario, personally, I think the better. They're definitely more expensive than a screw pin shackle, but I think there's a lot of benefits to them.
I like having both of them along.
Yeah.
The concern that I have with soft shackles is that they are vulnerable to sharp edges on the chassis. A lot of times when we're doing recoveries, we may not notice that there's that little piece of flashing, or when we put it into the factory recovery point, we don't notice that there's something in there that's sharp, or we need to put it around something that's non-conventional. So I like to have both. I think obviously biggest advantage to soft shackles is the fact that it reduces mass from a connection point. So soft shackles can be really great for that. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I absolutely carry both. Learned how to tie them, so that reduces the expense a little bit, which is kind of nice. And we mentioned Dyneema in general for winch lines, but we didn't really go over the weaknesses or the problems with Dyneema. Is what you said. They don't like sharp objects. Under load, they can cut quite easily. They don't like heat. They don't like abrasion. So any of those areas where those could happen, put a bow shackle in.
Yeah.
Just because, again, it's the wire rope versus synthetic.
Yeah.
They both have their places. And
I think like for utility, I still like wire rope. If I had a brush truck, I'd probably have wire rope.
Oh, right. Yeah. Something that's going to have
less
that abrasion.
maintenance, etc.
Totally. Yeah. If you're winching all the time, especially in muddy environments where a lot of materials getting impregnated into the winch line, the synthetic line is just not a good solution for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. And then I would also make the argument for a recovery board as a part of a basic recovery kit, because it's so common that someone that's new to driving will get themselves overstuck. They'll get too stuck where you just can't get out with using these basic recovery skills like airing down and shovel and all that other stuff. So having a way to self-recover, we don't always have other vehicles with us. So I just permanently leave a set of Max Tracks. There are other brands as well. During the Camel Trophy days, they use the PSP
board,
which PSP in dry conditions is fantastic. They struggle a lot once things get wet because they just don't have the traction, the surface traction of a modern recovery board.
I think there's this little downside to a recovery board. I mean, seldom are they going to make a scenario worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, true. Absolutely.
That's the way I look at it. I'll kind of stay out of that one.
Well, I mean, it kind of comes down to they're either going to work or they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite literally that simple. And if they work, they're absolutely save you a whole bunch of work.
I always like to say when we crossed the Simpson Desert with our Land Cruiser that had like 4 horsepower and weighed like 18 million pounds, we would lay them down proactively. On that sand dune that you know that you're not going to make it up. I always liked doing that, and I still do that with our kind of camper vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can build a road with recovery boards. And I've had to do that on many occasions. Just recently with the new Defender, we were in the coral pink sand dunes and we had a less experienced driver and they were struggling. And by using the Max Tracks in this case, they were shocked. They were literally wide-eyed at how, you turn it over, use it as a shovel, move a bunch of material out of the way, shove it up underneath the tire, give it a little press with your foot so that it gets planted, and then slowly apply throttle so that the lugs of the tire can begin to key with the teeth of the tread board, then it just pops you out so quickly. So they really have a lot of use. And I think that they are a fairly good idea to bring along as a fundamental piece of kit. You can move them from vehicle to vehicle. If you sell your truck, it's easy to just take it on with a new vehicle. So I think they're actually a fairly good investment in that regard.
Yeah. And I think too, not to dwell on it or trying to sound biased, but for those that maybe don't have a winch or they're travelers that don't have the budget to obtain one and do not have the training, it's just cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah. With regards to the winch, people think, okay, I'm going to say I'm going to get a good quality winch that's going to be $8,000 to $1,000. That's kind of just the start.
Yeah.
So now I have to have a way to attach it to my vehicle. So a good quality bumper for my old Land Rover is $1,200. And now the winch itself, I need a winch kit, recovery kit that has all the pieces, the tree strap and all, and the pulley block and all that. So it's not just the purchase of the winch. It's a wonderful tool. I probably would never
argue against the utility of one.
No, absolutely. But you just have to, if it's just not economically feasible for you, then there are much less expensive ways to, more labor intensive, but to get the same thing done.
Yeah. And it can be more expedient. It can also help you go backwards really easy. You can use a front mounted vehicle winch to winch rearward as well. But it's more complicated around vehicles that are newer, where they're less okay with running winch cables underneath them and stuff.
Yeah.
You think about all of the sensors and airbags and anyways, we don't need to go into that kind of a detail on it, but there are times that you want to just make it very simple, and sometimes going in reverse is the best way to get out of a scenario for sure. So now let's move on to the basic equipment that we want now that we've introduced potentially a vehicle mounted winch, or we want to take into consideration additional scenarios. That's where I would absolutely include the recovery boards, 2, ideally 4 recovery boards. You also want to include a utility strap or a tree strap. This is going to be something with null stretch. If it is Dyneema, it needs to have some kind of padding around it if you're going to use it as a tree strap, so that way we don't disturb or break the cadmium of the tree and do damage to the tree. So we never want to do that. So we never want to wrap winch line around a tree. We always want to use a tree strap or something that can distribute that force on the bark. So we do want to have some kind of a utility strap. We also want to consider bringing along a line dampener or knowing what we can use as a line damper. So a messenger bag works great for that with a few things put in it, soft things put in it with some weight. We can also use a duffel bag and we can put the strap around it. There's a jacket,
a wet sweatshirt or something.
Yeah, jacket, something. Now,
something is better than nothing. That's where that whole counterpoint thing comes in. Yes, it's great to have the
safety jacket.
Yeah, the safety jacket. This is what we're talking about here. This is a recovery damper. Great to have one of these, but that's at its core, what is this? This is this is like a nylon with a little bit of weight into it. My sweatshirt probably doesn't weigh much more than that.
The whole idea is if it breaks, it drops it to the ground.
Yeah.
It doesn't let it fly up. And so whatever works to dampen that is fine.
The line damper has two functions. It functions as a sail, which means we want to have surface area so that way when or if the line breaks, it slows it down as it moves through the air. We want to add a sail area to it. And then we also want to add a little bit of weight, but weight that's safe if it impacts another vehicle or an individual. And that weight helps to bring the line down to the ground. So we want to have some surface area and we want to have a little bit of weight to it. Again, we don't want to hang a bunch of shackles on the line. That's totally counterproductive. So, but line damper is a good idea, or knowing how to do an improvised line damper. We want to bring along additional shackles. That's probably a good time to start looking at the soft shackles as well and understanding how they work and getting some training on that as well. And then once we introduce a winch into that, we want to start to be able to take advantage of the mechanical nature of a winch by introducing one or multiple pulley blocks to increase the capacity of the winch. And we're doing that mechanically. It's a gearing effect. Now, when we increase the mechanical advantage of the winch with a pulley block, we are reducing the line speed by approximately half. It's actually a little bit more than that because we've introduced some parasitic drag into the system. But in general, we have to understand that things are going to be a little slower, which is rarely a bad thing, right, Jim?
Yeah, no, like I say, it's a slow, methodical process. So there's some competitive winches out there. That monster. Here, let's get this out of here so it doesn't confuse people. My dad, God bless him, had a couple sayings, and he said he got them from an old guy, and my dad was an old guy then, and apparently I'm an old guy now. But he said, basically, if you get a little stuck, what's the first thing you do? You make lunch.
Yeah, slow down.
Slow down. Yeah, if you get really stuck, you make camp. Yeah. And the whole point there is, and again, we kind of hit on it earlier, is especially with a winch or even a kinetic recovery, is if you do it wrong, bad things can happen. At the very least, it won't be successful. At the very most, somebody gets hurt or equipment gets broke. It's really good to slow down, come up with a good plan. One of the things, especially when you introduce a pulley into the process, is it's more critical to think of where's my weak link. The point there is so if I have a winch extension going from a tree anchor or whatever to the pulley, and then it's double line back, understanding that if the winch is full, at full power, so mine's a 9,000 pound winch, so that's 18,000 pounds is pulling, what's the rate on the extension? Because that's, whereas the winch line's only taking 9 on each side, it's splitting that, but where that goes to the tree. So you have to always build to the program's weakest link.
Correct. What's that single point of failure?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now on the table, we just put down, this is actually sold by 7P, and there's other ones out there. MaxTrax sells ones as well. But we have a synthetic line that's turned into a synthetic shackle.
A beefy one.
Yeah, very beefy one.
Yeah,
it's a monster. And then we have a machined aluminum ring that goes inside it. So Jim, give us the incentive towards using a product like this. There are people that have some concerns with them, and I think that they're valid, but there's also definitely some usability behind these things as well. Mm-hmm. So what brought this to people's mind? Why are they becoming more popular?
Again, this absolutely came out of the sailing industry. These kind of pulley blocks are used quite.
Yeah, they even have like carbon fiber ones for yachts.
Yeah, like on the
America's Cup boats,
I don't have one of those.
You don't?
No.
What do we have on here?
Again, what we used before that was whether you call it a shiv or a pulley block, or do they work? Absolutely, they work. This came about again. A good friend of mine kind of started having a think because again, synthetic rope it's the strongest based on the radius, and there's a whole formula for radius. I do not know what that formula is. Sharp edges, we already said it doesn't like that, and so the radius inside of a recovery ring, and pretty much all of them have kind of the same radius as far as the inside goes, is more conducive to synthetic rope. It likes that bend better than the radiuses for a regular pulley block. Depending on the cheeks of the pulley block or how it's designed, it can actually abrade if the synthetic rope is sticking up above, whereas these are very, very deep. So you can get some failures there. Again, pluses and minuses. I beat that horse to death. One of the minuses of this, and why most people who don't like it it. They don't like it because if you put your program together and it's not tensioned up, you have to keep an eye on this. Once you tension it up, if you've built your program right, you're fine. But if you, say if you're doing a drive winch,
that doesn't work.
Really good. Yeah, you can, but you have to be amazingly disciplined. You cannot completely unload. If you unload the system, the rope can fall right out of this, and that's a problem.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
So you have to keep an eye on it, which means that it can fall out of the ring.
Absolutely.
And then you need to shut down the driving operation so that you're not shock loading it, or you're not putting rope on rope, which would very quickly cut through it.
Right.
And certainly there's not only the radius for the winch line, but there's also the diameter of the ring, which will help distribute heat, will also give some additional mechanical advantage, mostly around heat and that radius. But if it gets too big, then you've got this huge piece of material you got to carry along with you. And it adds a lot of weight to your kit. So there's a reason why these things are the diameter that they are and that they have the radiuses that they do, is to manage heat and also to minimize the likelihood of damage to the dyneema.
I think for overland travelers, at the end of the day, you cannot carry everything with you. You have a certain amount of weight. You have a certain amount of stuff that you can fit in spaces, right? When I look at the way that I travel and the way that I go off-road, etc., I am less inclined to bring a traditional pulley. They are pretty heavy. They kind of move around, they rattle, they're very useful. I'm not arguing against the utility of them. But when I look at how I travel, this is a lot more approachable, right? You can carry one of these, for most people in most situations in overlanding, they probably never should need a pulley block. Let's be realistic. But when you do have to do more advanced rigging, something like this at, 2 pounds right now becomes worth its weight in gold, right? So this is really easy to just throw in. I don't know how you feel about this. I look at the recovery ring as more of a casual user. I look at the pulley block as maybe more of a professional or commercial use case. That's just how I tend to recommend them. Full disclosure, we do sell these things too, but
just not quite as good, right?
We'll fight about that one later, bro. No, but that's the way I break it down. If somebody's coming to me and they're saying, hey, I want to use this thing day in, day out. I'm a tow truck driver. I am whatever. No, go with the pulley block. But again, for overland travelers, you can't have everything. This is a good way to have something you can shove that in the back of a drawer system. And
it's a fraction of the weight. That's a huge advantage.
Because those fractions of weight do add up. People might say, oh, it's only 30 pounds less. I'm like,
but obviously, so this is the biggest one we build. And again, coming back to loading, if you buy a pulley block or you buy a recovery ring from, I think there's 5 manufacturers doing them now.
I think there's 5 million. Because what's happened is they've ended up on Alibaba. So there's like the Alibaba overland companies, like
all of them,
like there's one that's like overland vehicle something. They have one overland vehicle systems. It's like $20 and it's like that big.
Yeah.
I would love to do some destructive testing on it.
Right.
There's a lot of heat that generates in that very small diameter. So from my perspective, they do have their use. They need to be used with some additional training.
Yes.
They also, because they are more complex than a typical pulley block, the rope can fall off of the ring and come in contact with the soft shackle, which can lead to almost immediate failure. So the advantage of a traditional pulley block is they have these wings that open, and you put the line in there, and then the wings close, and then
closed system.
It's a closed system, so it does much better in dynamic recoveries between driving and winching. It doesn't mean you can't use a ring for driving and winching, but it requires that marshal to be very mindful of the recovery ring. So again, for those that are listening, that can be an advantage. I do bring one along, but I bring it along as my second pulley block. And that's the reason why I bring it, because I want the second one to be lighter, take up less space.
You use that one less often.
Correct.
That becomes a much more complex system.
Yeah.
The biggie here is, and regardless, is I have a pulley block at home and I don't use it. It is specific. It looks like an ARB pulley block. It looks exactly like it. And it says 9,000 on it. It doesn't say 9,000 anything. It just says 9,000. So again, back to that, make sure your equipment is good quality equipment.
Sure.
Like I said, the Alibaba stuff. Make sure it's rated appropriately for your vehicle, and the ratings should, like I say, they should be on there.
And I'll get on my high horse on quality recovery equipment here. When I ran Unsealed 4x4 as the editor of that magazine in Australia, we did a huge comparison test where we went to the store and we bought 3 of every major snatch strap sold in the market. As quite predictably, the cheaper brands, I mean, they were,
High failure rate.
3 out of 3, or I want to say we bought 3. We did a wet test and then we did 2 dry tests at a certified rigging facility. It was a night and day between the quality stuff and the cheap stuff. I mean, ARB was the most consistent, which I think consistency, we awarded them the best because it was the most consistent. You want things to be consistent. You don't
Predictable.
you don't want to buy a 9,000, pound rated item and it breaks at 18 or, breaking strength. Recovery stuff can be very tedious with its terminology.
Yes.
So I caught myself there, but you don't want something that is advertising 1 being actually a 2. That's all I'm really trying to say there. So if there's any place that you're going to spend money, again, I know I have bias with the whole max tracks and all that kind of stuff, but it's even more appropriate, I think, with anything involving a winch or, kind of vehicle recovery, buy the best that you can afford. I think
because these are safety devices. We have to understand
there's safety devices that can turn into the opposite very quickly.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Those cheap, was going to say a name that ended in built, but I stopped myself. But those Chinese pot metal shackles,
right?
They can be really dangerous. They
can have inclusions. They can have a lot of stuff.
High inclusion rate. Exactly. Yeah. So, all right, well, let's talk. We've talked about pulley blocks. Let's talk about some other consideration. We'll just kind of run through this. There's a tool called a transit cluster. They're used typically by towing companies. You can go on to Expedition Exchange. That John Lee there sells them all day long. But it allows you, if you got to pull a Subaru off the trail or a vehicle that doesn't have a recovery point, it allows you to key into those various holes on the frame. Again, these aren't rated recoveries. This is if everything has gone bad.
Yeah, this is something a tow truck driver would carry them to get the Toyota Corolla out of the back.
So you may want to consider a transit cluster. We'll include that in the show note. A winch line extension is a good idea, particularly if you're traveling in areas that is not heavily forested. If you're traveling in heavily forested areas, then they're less important.
Yeah, because there may be a point that you can recover from, but there also may be a safer point just a little bit further. I always carry a winch line extension. I've been in so many scenarios where I have to use a winch.
5 feet short.
Yeah, exactly.
5.
Yeah. And you get more winch line power, the more wraps you have around that drum too. So something to consider.
The fewer. Yeah.
Again,
so
technical stuff.
Additional things to consider is having rated recovery points. ARB is one of the few that sells rated recovery points, but know what the gross vehicle weight rating is of your vehicle and know if your recovery points on your vehicle is rated for that gross vehicle weight. If not, consider having that upgraded. Make sure that you do that. We also want to look at the idea of bringing along ground anchors like a pole pal, improvised solutions for that, which we could go into great lengths about.
Yeah, there's that new dead man thing. And I think that, there's almost a similarity between the discussion of the recovery ring and a more formal pulley block. I think that the dead man, they work really well. They're very functional, but maybe more of an emergency tool than, let's say, a pull pal. One's going to set itself. One's going to have to, require you to dig a hole, but both are better than not having it.
Yeah, they can be very labor intensive for sure. I like to use the pull pal on Expedition 7 because we were so remote so much of the time. We had a pull pal along in one of the vehicles and we used it a lot more often than I expected that we would. But yeah, there's always the option of burying tires and all kinds of other ideas that work. Again, I've found that pairing max tracks with a winch or vehicle to vehicle recovery tends to solve most of those problems. But when you need a pull pal, you really need it.
Yeah.
It's one of the few things that actually solves the problem.
They're great.
All right. And then the last thing around advanced considerations is a rear mounted winch. In most cases, winches are used for recreational purposes, which is why they're on the front. If you are, let's say you're driving a very large vehicle like an earth roamer, or you're driving a man vehicle and you can only put it one side of the other, you may actually be better off putting it at the rear of the vehicle, having a front and a rear winch if the gross vehicle weight allows for it. That can be another tool in the toolbox. But I think that if you're doing vehicle recreation, you almost always want to have the winch on the front of the vehicle. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, Land Rover came out with the SVX Discovery years ago, and it ended up just being a more of a show car. And because of all the front impact stuff, which is a problem with modern cars and aftermarket winches, they mounted one on the rear.
Interesting.
And kind of looked at it and played with it a bit. And I grew up in a front winch world. And so to have it in the back, you have to completely rethink your thought process.
Yeah.
It absolutely works. I mean, if you're going in, it's basically it's a defeatist winch.
Sure.
Because you're going to go in and I'm not going to keep going forward. I got to go back.
Yeah.
And I know there's all manner of receiver hitch, portable winches, portable winch trays. Again, pluses and minuses. They give you versatility, which is nice, but side pulls.
Incredible amount of leverage.
They don't like side pulls at all. It just bends them up like a cheap lawn chair.
It does. Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, it just kind of keeps coming back to is what works for you.
Yeah,
whatever you have, learn how to use it.
And very much keeping it simple.
They did a expo years ago at Mormon Lake still. A Volkswagen Jetta got stuck. It was the Mud Fest. And a couple of us walked over to this thing. It was pusher to, and they already had the trunk lid up and the loop for the trunk they had hooked.
Oh.
And I'm like, I'm out. I'm going to watch this from far but again, stepping outside the bounds, it worked.
Yeah.
The guy was super gentle. It was barely stuck and they just pulled him back onto the road. And it's like, I don't think I'd have done that.
Sometimes you got to improvise, right? So,
yeah, it's like, it worked.
We touched on that idea, rated recovery points. The thing that I'm super passionate about, is I've had to write these stories when people die. Do not use a tow ball as a recovery point because you're basically putting thousands of pounds of energy with a kinetic strap behind a cannonball.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And it will go through people.
Right.
Do not do it. And everything else. Yeah.
Like if there's anything you take from this and you see somebody doing that, make sure you're not within cannonball range.
Leave.
And then
just leave.
Honk or whatever you can do. But
I've got a great picture of a CJ and it was cool because I got the story behind it. So they're doing a kinetic recovery, 2 straps, D shackle in the middle, hooking the 2 straps together. And CJ5 is launching to pull this guy up. And so it doesn't work. So he keeps backing up, keeps giving it a whole bunch more welly. And so the last time, and the best part is when he's driving, he's doing this. So the D shackle or one of the straps, it would be the stuck vehicle strap, breaks right there. That loop snaps and it launches the D shackle right through the middle of the tire. So that steel that is mounted on the back of the Jeep, through the back tailgate, through the headrest of the seat, through the windshield. And so it basically, with that recovery strap, it threaded the Jeep like a needle. And if he'd have been sitting like this driving, it'd have come right through his head. Yeah. The force is amazing.
Yeah.
People underestimate that energy. They really do.
And those straps are capturing energy. They're stretching and they're absorbing and they're ready to catapult energy for sure. I'm
going to release it somehow.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's the car getting out.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I guess that kind of brings us into our next step, which is admitting defeat.
Yeah. So I think that one of the keys around recovery is saying that it's not going to work. I'm going to admit defeat early. I'm not going to keep digging and spinning. Once you feel like you're not making progress, back off the throttle.
Yeah, because you can make things worse and multiple ways.
You can make it so much more difficult. Yeah. So admit defeat early, use recovery gear proactively, put down max tracks ahead of the time, get your equipment ready, unspool the winch and, battle wrap it around the bumper, all of those things that can get you prepared in advance if you really think that you're going to get stuck. Now, of course, the counterpoint to that is you could just send it, right? So, and a lot of people, I've been amazed at what some people can get through by just using a whole lot of momentum, but the risk goes up significantly with that. Right. You've introduced all of this speed and you end up with a lot of vehicle damage in those kinds of scenarios. But I've also seen some incredible feats of driving skill and vehicle durability, usually Land Cruisers, getting through something by, just sending it, right?
Yeah.
So, when it works, it's beautiful. And when it goes wrong, it's great.
As slow as possible, as fast as necessary.
And sometimes for people, fast as necessary means really fast.
They go right to the second half of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, since we've gotten stuck now, we're going to your point earlier, Jim, was that let's make a cup of tea. Let's assess the situation. Let's formulate a plan. I've heard it called a stuck assessment. Essentially, just make a plan, take some time. When you first get stuck, the adrenaline's high, people are amped up, people may feel embarrassed. Give it some time. Relax, go have a drink of water, go take a little short walk, and then come back with a fresh mind And that's the point in time that you want to have that conversation with a group, because people may have ideas, ask others how they would get it undone. Once you've decided on a plan, then we want to keep the peanut gallery to a minimum. We don't want people yelling while the stuck recovery is happening. So we want to make a cup of tea, chill out.
Yeah. I am not ashamed of telling people to shut up.
Yeah.
You know, like if that person is annoying you from the peanut gallery, tell them to stop, right? It's your vehicle or you know, whomever is in charge of that recovery. You know, I don't think it's unfair to ask people to just remove themselves. The
only exception to that rule that we teach, and we always say, you know what, specifically, so if you're doing a winch operation and you have your person out marshaling that winch, we're the only two people that exist, with one exception. If anybody, anywhere yells stop.
Yeah, safety.
That's the only thing, is to stop. And they might be completely full of it. They might have seen something, you know, they might be talking to their dog who's running away. But
that's fine.
Stop and reassess.
Everybody agrees that stop means stop no matter what.
No matter where.
Because you're already stuck. You are already in the situation.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's good advice, Jim. And that's important for people to remember, that they can be empowered to say stop, but pretty much nothing else, because it really can be disruptive and unsafe for the people that are trying to get unstuck, to get a whole bunch of chatter from the peanut gallery. All right. So now we're going to move on to some of the fundamentals of recovery techniques. Now, we can't really do a lot around this in a podcast, but we're going to talk about it in the types of recovery techniques. So there's self-recovery, which can start by airing down more, even going to very low pressures in the sand to get you unstuck, and then air up again to an operating pressure. Of course, using a shovel, again, using recovery boards, using sand ladders. There's a difference between a board and a ladder. A ladder can also be used for bridging as well, for certain scenarios. There's improvised solutions, like even using your floor mat, or like I tried to use with the blunt, with the drapes and blunt. You can have a bunch of people helping to push. Sometimes just that little bit of human effort and ingenuity can get you out of a stuck scenario.
Yeah, in some parts of the world, like asking for help might be your best scenario. Like if you're in Southeast Asia.
Yeah,
just
8,000 people will show up.
Hey, can you come push?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how many times have we seen somebody getting pulled out with a line of oxen or whatever? And I mean, how cool is that? That
Ray Highland has some just amazing stories of, you know, being in Indonesia somewhere, Malaysia somewhere in the rainforest, and we're stuck. Okay, well, wait 5 minutes, and there's going to be some people that come by.
Yeah, people show up out of everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so those are self-recovery solutions. Then we've got vehicle-mounted electric winches. We can also use what's called a Tierfer style winch, which basically is a hand over hand passing. Essentially, it's a mechanism inside the Tierfer winch that pulls the winch line, captures it, relocates the pulling component, and then pulls it again. And they're very slow. They do work. They tend to be very lightly rated. If they're rated for real work, then they are massive, and they kind of defeats the purpose. If you're doing a lot of crazy driving in really muddy situations, or I use it in the snow for side slopes and stuff like that, because then you can connect it to the rear of the vehicle to create a pendulum effect and take up slack and keep the rear of the vehicle from sliding. Works great for that. High lift does the same thing. These are improvised tools. They aren't ideal for most scenarios. Anything else that you've used like that, Jim?
I've used everything, mainly because, again, you know, went so many years without a winch. And again, you find there's a great YouTube where the guy uses the two logs and creates a winch.
I saw that.
And I had never thought of that.
Fascinating.
It's just like, that will work. So I like to always tell people it's basically limited to the equipment you have, what's around you, and your imagination.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you look around, I mean, as simple as a straight line, like you're using a winch extension, and that ridge line, the force in the middle is 4 to 7 times each side. So sometimes just having that rigid line in a vehicle stuck, you can get a couple of people to push, pull, and it gets enough. I mean, just that much.
There's a lot of leverage.
Exactly. So
yeah, that's fascinating.
It's good stuff. Again, people, we did a Jeep job in Turkey years ago, and we were creating a really difficult route, and people kept showing up and fixing a road. You know, I mean, quite literally, they were making a freeway for us, but people show up, and people it's got to be a worldwide thing. Most of the time, they want to help.
Yeah.
If you say, "Hey, could you help out?" I've never had somebody go, "No."
Yeah.
I mean, they just all want to help. So yeah, just using what's around you.
Yeah, the locals can really add a lot. They can add a lot of drama and and problems as well.
Yeah.
Because usually they're excited. You know, but they may not have the same training you do. So make sure that you are
be specific,
kind. You always want to be kind in your communications. You always want to be specific in your communications, but also don't be afraid to be assertive, because at the end of the day, it's your vehicle and your safety. On the vehicle mounted winches, the winch rating. So again, we want to be looking at that about 1.5 times gross vehicle weight. If you get the winch closer and closer to the gross vehicle weight of the vehicle, like let's say it's a 6,000 pound gross vehicle weight, you have a 6,000 pound winch, then you're going to be taxing that winch, and you're going to have to be very specific about the number of wraps that you're using to get that maximum pull. You're also going to need to introduce pulley blocks. So you typically want to have a winch that's rated about 1.5 times to 2 times gross vehicle weight. Has that been your experience as well, Jim?
Just a couple of things here, and you kind of touched on it, is winches are rated with an empty spool. And so basically that first wrap on that spool is where you get the 9,000. If it's each wrap after that, you lose about 15%.
Sure.
So by the time you get the most, if you have a normal amount of rope, you have about 5 wraps. So you've really lost that pulley block. You pull off twice as much. That helps that, because you get down to those lower wraps. And people underestimate, again, so my car is a pretty heavy car. It weighs 5,000. Well, I have a 9,000 pound winch. I can lift it vertically, but people underestimate, if there's a little slope, if it's buried to the frame rails, how much actual force it takes to move that vehicle. That's where the 1.5 times comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we don't want to go with too much winch either, because we've added unnecessary expense, we've added unnecessary weight, we've reduced the line speed as well, which a slow winch is not necessarily a bad thing. But there are consequences also with going with too heavy of a winch.
Sure.
You don't want to
put a 16.5 Warn on a Samurai.
Yeah,
just you want to pull the frame apart.
Yeah, exactly. You want to use the appropriate tools for the job, right? So that's around vehicle mounted winches. We also want to make sure that we have a way to connect up the line. We want to have connection points. We want to have tree straps. We want to have appropriate anchors as well, which means that it could be on another vehicle if we're winching to another vehicle, or if we're coming back to our own vehicle, that any of those connection points need to be rated for the load that we're asking of the system, for sure. Now, we talked a little bit about synthetic versus steel cable. There is no hard and fast rule on it. The Dyneema will always be safer. The cable will oftentimes be more durable, and that's the reason why people oftentimes stick with cable.
I think the main benefit these days of synthetic lines are the fact that the cargo capacity of vehicles, I don't want to say is dwindling, but the vehicles are getting heavier and they can't, carry as much. You can lose a lot of weight very quickly by going to synthetic. So that also plays a factor, in my opinion, not having to have an extra 50, 60, 70 pounds at the furthest most point of your vehicle from that axle. There is a benefit there.
Absolutely. And the counterpoint to the winch is obviously winches are expensive. And to what you talked about earlier, Jim, is you've got all these other components that you need to buy, and even upgrading batteries and everything else. You can pay for a whole trip with just the cost of a winch. So if you travel mostly in the desert Southwest, or you don't really travel in muddy conditions, or you've got
that cholla cactus isn't going to pull you be a good suitable recovery.
So there are times where you don't want to have a winch, or you want to make sure that, or you might say that it's less of a priority. So, and also vehicles can really pack up against their gross vehicle weight rating. So, and a winch is a heavy item. So we need to be mindful of how much weight a winch adds as well. All right. So now we're getting to the last little component of our discussion, which is vehicle to vehicle recovery. What are some things, Jim, that you've seen around vehicle to vehicle recovery? What are some good basic techniques or things to be mindful around vehicle to vehicle recovery?
So I guess, two things. Again, are you using the second vehicle as just an anchor? And then it becomes basically your standard winch. You're using a winch line versus kinetic. And kinetic is probably the fastest way. People, especially people when they have a brand new winch, they always want to pull out the winch rope. But again, slow, methodical. It takes time versus it's like, you can put a kinetic rope or a strap on there and we're down the road in 2 minutes. Where people get into trouble. And so my rule of thumb is for just doing a kinetic recovery is I'll hook the vehicles together and I'll back up. So basically the line is on the ground and that's it. And that gives me about a car length before. And the whole thought process is I want the front car to have momentum. The rope stretches, it transfers all that momentum and energy back to the back car, hopefully popping them out. I've seen people for their first pull, back up almost bumper to bumper.
Sure.
And again, it's like the winch where you're creating a massive amount of energy depending on how much you get out. And you will discover the weak link. Hopefully it's the vehicle stuck moving, but again, with that kinetic energy, it's going to transfer somewhere. So I start very conservative, do that little boom and see what happens. Did the car move a little bit? Cool. A little bit more. We're down the road. It didn't move at all. When I find myself backing up to where the rope's about halfway under my car, I'll give that a shot, and I'm giving it a bit more welly each time. But I'm easing into that increasing of energy. If I get to that point and nothing's moved, I'm probably going to get out. We're going to have a conversation and come up with a plan B.
Yeah, sure. Maybe the vehicle's, high centered. Maybe there's a rock in front of the differential, something,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
What is the minimum effective dose, right? So if we can, sometimes it doesn't require backing up at all. Sometimes just getting it under tension, it starts to build up some energy in the rope itself, and it easily extracts the vehicle, particularly if the recovering vehicle is highly capable. You take a Jeep Rubicon on 40s and it's going to pull a lot of things out without even having to back up or any welly at all. Put it into low gear and slowly pull it out. So you really want to do that minimum effective dose because we don't want to introduce a lot of energy into the system that we don't need to. Now, there are certainly times that you have to. Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing that's key around that is communications. That's where it's good to have radios so that way you can communicate like I'm going, I'm starting to go, which the vehicle that's being recovered can see that, but the person that's doing the recovery may not know that you're unstuck, or they may not know that you've hung up on something or something has failed. So having a way to communicate is really important.
And if you don't have radios, find a simple system of communication.
Exactly.
That can
like
be
a horn.
A horn. Yeah. Like most cars have them.
Yep.
One horn means go. Two horns means stop.
Yeah. I'm good. Yeah. We did a recovery back at the one Mormon Lake Mud Fest. And I remember as a German couple who were overlanding around the world, and they had this giant man truck.
Sure.
And they augured in, and I mean, it went down. And he kept saying, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to air down." It's like, well, bud,
pass that one, bud.
You can't beat physics. So quite literally, they said, "Hey Jim, go get your car," which is my Discovery, and hooked up a strap to it. And one of my fellow instructors, Lee McGee, I trust him implicitly. He was that link of communication, and so I know what's in my mind. He knew what was in his mind, and we got out of jive. So he said, "Back up, back up, back up. Cool, you're good." And I leaned out and said, "So I got just the ropes on the ground, right?" And he said, "Yep," which meant something different apparently to both of us. So I took off knowing that I'm going to have about a car length. Mm-hmm. And so I gave it quite a bit, knowing that the man truck was massively heavy compared to my car. I'm not creating much energy. And you have that point where I should have hit the end of the rope by now.
Yeah.
And I hadn't. And it's like, and I went another full car length, and my car's accelerating, diesel. So
as fast as
your car's up to 3 miles an hour.
Yeah, it was massive acceleration.
95 horsepower.
Yes, it's 111. Thank you.
I was trying to be insulting, and that was actually even worse.
It's sad on so many levels. But you reach that point where you think something should happen and it hasn't.
Sure.
And I was literally about ready to come out of the throttle when I hit the end of it, and a big transfer of energy, and it yanked the truck right out.
Yeah, I bet.
and it was this whole David and Goliath thing, because you see this little bitty Discovery in this giant man truck, but it worked well. But we were not in sync where we should have been. And again, that conversation, you have to be on the same page, because if things go wrong, they can go horribly wrong.
Yeah, and slowing down, making sure you're on the same page. And I guess to summarize some of the most important things is to really focus on safety, focus on communication, focus on training before you make any significant purchases around recovery, employ the minimum effective dose on vehicle to vehicle recovery, and then don't buy the whole catalog right off the bat. Start by learning more about recovery and driving, and you may find that you really don't need.
Yeah, I mean, how many high lift jacks do we see on vehicles that have no way of using them?
Well, you're not going to lift it with it. Yeah,
you're not lifting it with it, right? I mean, maybe you can use the tire attachment, and you can use it as a come along kind of thing, but make sure you have the supporting modifications.
Know what it does. That's exactly what you're saying, Scott, is know what it does before you buy it.
But the cool thing is all of this stuff if you want to dive in deeper. There's 4-wheel drive trainers almost everywhere. There's 4-wheel drive clubs. There's the ubiquitous knowledgeable guy that's down the street that maybe you can glean some information from. But yeah, 7P is a great place to look. You guys do a lot of the, overland rallies, overland expos. I4WDTA is something I always recommend. Again, make sure you're finding the right instructor for what you're doing. You don't need the Ultra 4 guy if you're in a synchro that wants to drive the Pan American Highway. You might end up with conflicting personalities. But yeah, I just think, slow down. Generally, in most recovery scenarios, I don't want to call it a mistake, but the mistake has already been made. You're already in the situation. And unless you're on the beach with the tide coming in, it's likely not going to get worse. Evaluate, is it going to get worse? Is it not going to get worse? And calm down. That's the number one thing I have realized from, myself maybe 15 years ago. My heart would be racing when I got stuck.
Yeah.
Or, the same thing where the first time you pick up a wheel in your car, your heart's racing. Well, you learn to just calm down and to be a little bit more methodical and a little bit more precise with what you're doing. So I don't know, a lot of information.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we've also got Overland Experts as a great resource.
Yeah,
7P International, obviously fantastic. And then
Overlanding BC, that's Chris Walker. He's up in
up outside of Vancouver.
Great dude, super experienced, works with all Land Rover guys. There's this thing, Google. Just maybe ask around.
Check it out and get recommendations. And Jim, where can people find out more about you? What's you have a social media channel that you maintain on Instagram? Or
I do. It'd be great if I knew that, wouldn't it? myquestadventures.com is probably the best way. That has all the links to every place. That's basically my own company. So the stuff that happens in the Phoenix Valley, that's what I run through.
Awesome.
I'm a part owner with 7P. So we do that with 7p.io is the website there. Again, on Facebook and all the social medias for pretty much any kind of training pretty much around the world.
Yeah, I can't recommend 7P enough. Each one of those individuals have impressed me in some way significantly in my time working with them. So a great organization. Matt, what's your current social thing on Instagram?
I hate social media.
Matt hates social media.
I guess as of today, I'm back on Instagram, which is Matt Explore. I occasionally go on it. That is all.
So make sure you troll Matt Explore.
There you go.
Please.
And I am Scott.A.Brady on Instagram. And we appreciate all of you for listening. Please reach out via those social channels to Matt or I if you have any additional questions or comments or concerns around the podcast that we can address for you. And we thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next time.